Ferdinand E. Marcos Sr. was a Filipino politician and kleptocrat who was the 10th President of the Philippines from 1965 to 1986. A leading member of the New Society movement, he ruled as a dictator under martial law from 1972 until 1981. One of the most controversial leaders of the 20th century, Marcos' rule was infamous for its corruption, extravagance, and brutality. Marcos claimed an active part in World War II, including fighting alongside the Americans in the Bataan Death March and being the most decorated war hero in the Philippines. A number of his claims were found to be false, and United States Army documents describe Marcos' wartime claims as fraudulent and absurd. Marcos started as an attorney, then served in the Philippine House of Representatives from 1949 to 1959, and the Philippine Senate from 1959 to 1965. He was elected president in 1965 and presided over a growing economy during the beginning and the immediate portion of his 20-year rule, but ended in loss of livelihood, extreme poverty, and a crushing debt crisis. Marcos placed the Philippines under martial law on September 23, 1972, during which the constitution was revamped. The media was silenced, violence and oppression occurred against the political opposition, Muslims, communists, and ordinary citizens. Martial law was ratified in 1973 through a fraudulent referendum. After being elected for a third term in the 1981 Philippine presidential election, Marcos' popularity suffered greatly due to public outrage of the assassination of Benigno Aquino Jr. in 1983. The assassination, along with the economic collapse, revitalized the opposition, resulting in them securing a better than expected victory in the 1984 Philippine parliamentary election. Both of these factors, alongside growing discontent and the discovery of documents exposing his finances and falsified war records, led him to call the snap election of 1986. Allegations of mass cheating, political turmoil, and human rights abuses led to the People Power Revolution of that February 1986, which removed him from power. To avoid what could have been a military confrontation in Manila between pro and anti-Marcos troops, Marcos was advised by U.S. President Ronald Reagan through Senator Paul Laxalt to cut and cut cleanly, after which Marcos fled to Hawaii. Marcos was succeeded by Corazon Cory Aquino, widowed of the assassinated opposition leader Senator Benigno Ninoy Aquino Jr., who had flown back to the Philippines to face Marcos. According to source documents provided by the Presidential Commission on Good Government or PCGG, the Marcos family stole 5 to 10 billion US dollars. The PCGG also maintained that the Marcos family enjoyed a decadent lifestyle, taking away billions of dollars from the Philippines between 1965 and 1986. His wife, Imelda Marcos, whose excesses during the couple's conjugal dictatorship made her infamous in her own right, spawned the term Imeldific. Two of their children, Amy Marcos and Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr., are still active in the Philippine politics. Early life and education. Ferdinand Emmanuel Edralin Marcos was born on September 11, 1917, in the town of Sarat, Ilocos Norte, to Mariano Marcos and Josefa Edralin. Mariano Marcos was a lawyer and congressman from Ilocos Norte, Philippines. He was killed in the waning days of World War II. Josefa Marcos was a school teacher who would far outlive her husband, dying in 1988. 2 years after the Marcos family left her in Malacanang Palace when they fled into exile after the 1986 People Power Revolution. Ferdinand was baptized into the Philippine Independent Church, but was baptized in the Roman Catholic Church at the age of 3. Marcos studied law at the University of the Philippines in Manila. Attending the College of Law, he excelled in both curricular and extracurricular activities, becoming a member of the university swimming, boxing, and wrestling teams. He was also an accomplished orator, debater, and writer for the students' newspaper. While attending the UP College of Law, he became a member of the Upsilon Sigma Phi, where he met his future colleagues in government and some of his staunchest critics. When he sat for the 1939 bar examinations, he was the bar top-notcher, with a score of 98.8%. But questions from various sectors prompted the Philippine Supreme Court to recalibrate his score to 92.35%. He graduated cum laude. He was elected to the Pi Gamma Mu and Pi Kappa Pi International Honor Societies, and latter giving him its Most Distinguished Member Award 37 years later. Ferdinand Marcos received his Doctors of Law honoris causa degree in 1967 from Central Philippines University. Presidency. Ferdinand Marcos was inaugurated to his first term as the 10th President of the Philippines on December 13, 1965, after winning the Philippine presidential election of 1965 against the incumbent President Diosdado Macapagal. His inauguration marked the beginning of his two-decade-long stay in power, even though the 1935 Philippine Constitution had set a limit of only 2 4-year terms of office. Before Marcos' presidency, the Philippines was the second largest economy in Asia, behind only Japan. He pursued an aggressive program of infrastructure development funded by foreign loans, making him very popular throughout almost all of his first term and eventually making him the first and only president of the Third Philippine Republic to win a second term. Although it would also trigger an inflationary crisis which would lead to social unrest in his second term, and would eventually lead to his declaration of martial law in 1972. On the evening of September 23, 1972, President Ferdinand Marcos announced that he had placed the entirety of the Philippines under martial law. This marked the beginning of a 14-year period of one-man rule which would effectively last until Marcos was exiled from the country on February 25, 1986. Even though the formal document proclaiming martial law, Proclamation number 1081, was formally lifted on January 17, 1981, Marcos retained virtually all of his powers as dictator until he was ousted by the EDSA Revolution. Fleeing from the Philippines to Hawaii. On February 25, 1986, Marcos talked to United States Senator Paul Laxalt, a close associate of the United States President Ronald Reagan, asking for advice from the White House. Laxalt advised him to cut and cut cleanly, to which Marcos expressed his disappointment after a short pause. In the afternoon, Marcos talked to Enrile asking for safe passage for him and his family, and included his close allies like General Burr. Finally, at 9 p.m., the Marcos family was transported by 4 helicopters to Clark Air Base in Angeles City, Pampanga, about 83 kilometers north of Manila, before boarding U.S. Air Force C-130 planes bound for Andersen Air Force Base in Guam, and finally to Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii, where Marcos arrived on February 26. Death and immurement. In his dying days, Marcos was visited by President Salvador Laurel. During the meeting with Laurel, Marcos offered to return 90% of his ill-gotten wealth to the Filipino people in exchange for being buried back in the Philippines beside his mother, an offer also disclosed to Enrique Zobel. However, Marcos' offer was rebuffed by the Aquino government. Marcos died in Honolulu on the morning of September 28, 1989, of kidney, heart, and lung ailments, 17 days after his 72nd birthday. Marcos was interred in a private mausoleum at Biodo Inn Temple on the island of Oahu, where his remains were visited daily by the Marcos family, political allies, and friends. The Aquino government refused to allow Marcos' body to be brought back to the Philippines. The body was only brought back to the Philippines 4 years after Marcos' death during the term of President Fidel Ramos. From 1993 to 2016, his remains were interred inside a refrigerated crypt in Ilocos Norte, where his son, Ferdinand Jr., and eldest daughter, Amy, have since become the local government and congressional representative respectively. A large bust of Ferdinand Marcos, inspired by Mount Rushmore, was commissioned by the tourism minister Jose Aspiras and carved into a hillside in Benguet. It was subsequently destroyed. Suspects included left-wing activists, members of a local tribe who had been displaced by construction of the monument, and looters hunting for the legendary Yamashita treasure.